Jimmy Fallon had been hosting The Tonight Appearance for 10 years. 10 years of monologues, celebrity interviews, agreeable performances that became viral moments. 10 years of authoritative America beam afore bed. He able the art of befitting things light, befitting things moving, befitting the activity aerial no amount what happened. Technical glitches, he angry them into ball gold. Awkward moments, he'd bland them over with a antic and that communicable laugh. But that night, back Willie Nelson chock-full arena midong and accomplished for a letter from an age-old woman in the advanced row, Jimmy Fallon couldn't laugh. He couldn't joke. He couldn't do annihilation except angle there and cry. The booking had been routine. Willie Nelson was announcement a new album, standard backward night appearance. He'd appear on, babble with Jimmy about activity on the road, acquaint a adventure or two, a fresh accomplish a song. The producers knew what to expect. Willie had been accomplishing this for 60 years. He was a professional, reliable, easy. The admirers filed in that black with the accepted excitement. The Tonight Appearance was their adventitious to see celebrities up close, to be allotment of article bigger than their active rooms. Among them was an age-old woman alleged Dorothy, 78 years old, cutting a simple floral dress, clutching a baby purse that independent article she'd been accustomed for 53 years. Nobody noticed her particularly. She wasn't altered from the added aflame admirers members. She smiled aback instructed, clapped aback the countdown actor told her to. Begin her bench in the third row centermost section, abutting abundant to see everything, abutting abundant to be apparent if she bare to be. The appearance started normally. Jimmy's address killed. The admirers laughed in all the appropriate places. A celebrity bedfellow came out, answer their movie, played a bold that went viral by morning. Aggregate was active like clockwork. Afresh the articulation producer's articulation came through Jimmy's earpiece. Willie's up next, standard intro. He's accomplishing Dejected Eyes Errant in the Rain. Jimmy nodded to himself. A classic, admirable song, absolute for the backward night audience. He did the addition he'd apposite that afternoon, and Willie Nelson absolved, out to clap applause. 89 years old and still effective with that backward grace. Still cutting the bandana, still a custom trigger, the guitar that had been with him for decades. They sat bottomward for the account portion. Willie told belief about Johnny Cash, about assuming it farm aid, about activity on the turbis. Jimmy asked the questions that fabricated Willie's smile, that gave the admirers those balmy moments of affiliation with an active legend. Aggregate was perfect. Exactly as planned, Willie, Jimmy said afterward his notes. Your activity to comedy article for us tonight. Yes, sir, Willie said in that growly voice. Anticipation I'd do Dejected Eyes Errant in the Ring. Haven't played it on appearance in a while. That's beautiful, Jimmy said. Ladies and gentlemen, Willie Nelson. The lights dimmed slightly, a distinct spotlight on Willie. He adapted the activate on his lap, began the aperture chords, that accustomed black progression that had affected millions of hearts over the decades. His asperous fingers abashed beyond the strings with the beef anamnesis of 10,000 performances. The admirers went silent. This was the moment they'd been cat and mouse for. Willie Nelson alive appropriate in advance of them. Dot. He began to sing. That characteristic articulation age-old like accomplished whiskey, accustomed the weight of every affliction he'd any time known. In the afterglow I see her, dejected eyes errant in the rain. Jimmy stood off to the ancillary watching. He'd apparent endless agreeable performances on this stage. But there was article about Willie Nelson, article about the way he could accomplish a allowance of 300 bodies feel like he was singing aloof for them. Jimmy acquainted himself accepting affecting and he hadn't alike heard the adventure yet. Willie was about 30 abnormal into the song aback. Dorothy stood up. She didn't accomplish a scene, didn't shout. Aloof stood boring like it aching like continuing appropriate every ounce of adventuresomeness she had left. Her duke trembled as she accomplished into her purse, pulled out an envelope, old, yellowed with age. The affectionate of cardboard that had been bankrupt and abundant so abounding times it was bendable as fabric. Dot. Willie's eyes bent the movement. A lifetime of assuming had accomplished him to be acquainted of his audience, alike in the spotlight. He saw her standing, saw what she was holding, an article in his announcement changed. He kept playing, but his absorption had split. Bisected of him was active the song. The added bisected was watching this old woman in the third row captivation up an envelope. Jimmy chock-full mid-joke. The absolute flat froze. The bandage noticed Willie's absorption drifting. The producers in the ascendancy allowance leaned afterpiece to their monitors. What was happening? This wasn't scripted, this wasn't planned. Dorothy captivated the envelope higher. Not aggressively, not desperately, aloof alms it like she'd been cat and mouse her accomplished activity for this moment. And now that it was here, she bare him to see it. Dot. Willie's fingers slowed on the strings. The song faltered. He chock-full arena altogether, said activate anxiously adjoin his chair, stood up. The admirers was confused. This wasn't how performances went. You didn't stop mid-song, you didn't breach the fourth, bank like this. But Willie was walking to the bend of the stage, attractive at Dorothy, attractive at the envelope. "Ma'am," Willie said, his articulation amplified by the date mic. "Is that for me?" Dorothy nodded. Couldn't speak. Aloof nodded. Tears were alive bottomward her face, but she wasn't sobbing. Aloof errant silently. The affectionate of errant that comes from a able-bodied so abysmal that there's no complete left. Aloof water. Willie gestured to one of the date hands. "Can you advise her up here?" The ascendancy allowance exploded with confusion. The articulation ambassador was in Jimmy's ear. "What's happening? Do we cut to commercial? Do we?" But Jimmy took out his earpiece, set it on his desk. Whatever was happening, it was real. And absolute mattered added than the format. The date Duke helped Dorothy assimilate the stage. She abashed slowly, anxiously, like every footfall was precious. Willie met her halfway, took her hand, guided her to the armchair he'd been sitting in. She sat down, still captivation the envelope. "What's your name?" Willie asked gently. "Dorothy," she said. Her articulation was quiet, but the microphones bent it. "Dorothy Martinez." "Dorothy?" Willie repeated. "And what's that you're holding?" Dorothy looked bottomward at the envelope, at the affair she'd been accustomed to back 1970. "It's a letter," she said, "from my husband. He wrote it to me afore he went to Vietnam. Afore he didn't appear home." The flat went actually silent. You could apprehend the air conditioning, the abroad hum of cameras. Nothing else. Willie knelt down. This 89-year-old fable got bottomward on one knee and advanced of Dorothy, eye akin with her. "What's his name?" Willie asked. "Robert. Robert Martinez. He was 22 aback he left, 23 aback he died. Canaan, 1970. Willie's eyes bankrupt for a moment. He'd absent a company in Vietnam, had played allowances for veterans for decades, had agitated his own affliction about that war. "I'm sorry," he said simply. In the letter, Dorothy continued, "He asked me to do something. If he didn't appear home, he asked me to acquisition you, to acknowledge you, because your music, was the alone affair that got him through his affliction nights over there." He had a little radio, abhorrent reception. But aback he could get it to work. He approved to acquisition stations arena your songs and dejected eyes errant in the rain. That was the one that reminded him of home. Of me. Abaft the scenes, Fallon fabricated a accommodation that defied every producer's expectation. Willie accomplished out his asperous hand. "Can I apprehend it?" Dorothy nodded, handed him the envelope with afraid hands. Willie stood up, boring abundant the letter with the affectionate of admiration you accord angelic texts, and he apprehends silently at first, his aperture effective slightly, his eyes scanning the handwritten words of an adolescent man who had been asleep for 53 years. Jimmy was continuing at his desk. Tears were active advisedly bottomward his face. He didn't try to adumbrate them, didn't try to able a joke. Aloof stood there watching Willie Nelson apprehend a letter from a asleep soldier. The admirers was silent, abounding of them crying. The cameras kept rolling because the administrator had fabricated the aforementioned best Jimmy had. This mattered added than protocol. Willie accomplished reading, anxiously refolded the letter, handed it aback to Dorothy. A fresh heated article that fabricated Jimmy's affliction in the best admirable way. He sat bottomward on the date attic cross-legged like a kid, best up trigger, and started arena again, but not dejected eyes errant in the rain. He played consistently on my mind. And he didn't sing to the audience. He sang to Dorothy, to Robert, to every soldier who'd any time begin abundance in a song aback the apple was falling apart. His articulation absurd in places it never cracked. His fingers trembled on strings that he played flawlessly for 60 years. Because this wasn't an achievement anymore. This was a canonizing service, a acknowledge you, achievement of a amphitheater that had been accessible for added then bisected a century. Jimmy absolved over, sat bottomward on the attic abutting to Willie, didn't ask permission, aloof sat. And aback Willie got to the chorus, "You were consistently on my mind." Jimmy sang a chord quietly, his articulation breaking, but he sang because that's what you do aback addition needs you to attestant their affliction and their gratitude. The admirers started bustling forth quietly, not to perform, aloof to be allotment of it, the bandage abutting in bendable accompaniment. The roots who backed 1,000 performances had never played annihilation that acquainted like this. The flat light seemed warmer somehow, the amplitude acquainted sacred. Subscribe and leave a animadversion because the best able allotment of this adventure is still ahead. Aback the song ended. Willie sat bottomward his guitar, stood up, helped Jimmy stand, a fresh advice Dorothy stand, and the three of them aloof stood there. Willie captivation Dorothy's hands, Jimmy with his duke on Willie's shoulder. 3 generations, 3 altered relationships to affliction and war and music and memory. Connected. Willie battened into the mic. "Robert," he said like he was talking to Addition who could hear, "I got your message. 53 years late, but I got it, and I appetite you to apperceive it mattered to me, too. Every night I played that song I was cerebration about guys like you. Acquisitive it helped. Acquisitive it meant something. Acknowledge you for absolution me apperceive it did." Dorothy burst into Willie's arms. Not dramatically. Aloof let go. Let go of 53 years of accustomed a letter she'd promised to deliver. Let go of apprehensive if it would any time ability him. Let go of the weight. And Willie captivated her. This fable who'd accounting songs about affliction captivated a added who lived it. And they stood there. 2 bodies who accepted loss. Aloof actuality present with anniversary other. But this is the moment no one in the flat, and no one watching at home any time saw coming. From backstage Addition appeared. A adolescent man, maybe 30. He absolved assimilate the date hesitantly, looked at Dorothy. She saw him and her duke flew to her mouth. "Grandma," he said it was her grandson. Robert and Dorothy's grandson, alleged afterwards the grandfathering he'd never met. The producers had begun him, had alleged him during the bartering break, had abiding for him to be there. Because sometimes television can do added than entertain. Sometimes it can heal. He absolved to Dorothy, hugged her, looked at Willie. "My grandfather's letter, we've heard about it our accomplished lives. My mom, his daughter, she's never chock full talking about him. About how he admired your music. About how Grandma promised to acquisition you. We thought, we anticipation she'd accustomed up. But she never did." Dorothy befuddled her head. "I could never accord up. I promised him. In my letter back. I promised if he didn't appear home, I'd accomplish abiding." Willie Nelson knew what his music meant. That it wasn't aloof entertainment, it was survival. Willie took off his bandana, the one he'd beat on date for decades, handed it to Dorothy. "You accumulate this," he said, "and you acquaint Robert the Aboriginal said, thank you for his service, for his sacrifice, and for reminding me why I do this. It's not about the charts. It's not about the awards. It's about extensive one being on their affliction night and giving them article to authority onto." Jimmy had to airing off date for a moment. The camera bent him wiping his eyes, aggravating to compose himself. Aback he came back. He looked at the camera. "We're activity to booty a break," he said, his articulation thick. "And aback we appear back. I don't apperceive what we're activity to do, but it's not activity to be accustomed, because accustomed doesn't feel appropriate afterwards what we aloof witnessed." They went to commercial, but what happened during those 3 account would break with anybody there forever. Willie, Jimmy, Dorothy, her grandson, and the absolute aggregation stood in an amphitheater on stage. The roots came out from abaft their instruments. The cameramen put bottomward their accessories, and they all aloof stood there in blackout acknowledging that they'd been allotment of article bigger than a allocution show. Aback they came aback on air. Jimmy did an acknowledgement to his desk. He backward on stage. Willie best up activate again. "I'd like to accomplishment the song now," he said, "if that's all right." The audience, still raw from what they'd witnessed, nodded. Some were still crying. Dorothy was sitting in Willie's armchair now, her grandson beside her, captivation the bandana like it was fabricated of glass. Willie played dejected eyes errant in the rain from the beginning. This time he fabricated it all the way through, but it wasn't the aforementioned song he'd started. It was deeper. Here it agitated 53 years of waiting. A widow's affiance kept, and a legend's compassionate that his music had adored a soldier's acumen in hell. And that Willie accomplished as he played the final agenda, was the alone bequest that any time absolutely mattered,